Right, I think I will make a start. We're probably going to have a few more people joining us, but they can trickle in as we go through the normal housekeeping and so forth. So my name is Adrian Sell and I'm Chief Executive of Oxfordshire Community Foundation, and welcome to our monthly webinar. This month, as you know, we are focusing on underrepresented communities, particularly when it comes to race and ethnic minorities. So I'd like to start by saying Ramadan Mubarak to everyone who is celebrating or participating in Ramadan this year. You should be muted already. If you're not, please mute yourself. If you're able to change your display name, I'm not sure who's sharing screen. Anyway, to your name and your organisation, that will help us identify people and who's attending. The webinar is being recorded and we will share it on our website, on our YouTube channel, so other people can catch up later on. Do use the chat box to introduce yourself, say hello, and make any comments or ask any questions, or we'll have some time for that, for some discussion towards the end. I'm going to kick off with a short presentation setting the scene for Oxfordshire and ethnic minority communities in Oxfordshire. So the first slide we have is a bar chart showing ethnic minority populations across the county. Now it's quite detailed, but broadly what it's showing you is that we have predominantly a white British population, as you would imagine, as you would expect for Oxfordshire, but some significant ethnic minorities around the county, particularly in Oxford City itself, but also in Banbury and to a lesser degree elsewhere. The data is based on the 2011 census, so it is a bit out of date, and I'm sure when the current census is completed and reported on, we will get a better picture, a more up-to-date picture. But overall, Oxfordshire is 9% not white as of 2011. A further 7% non-British white people. But within Oxford City, there are wards where there's almost 50% ethnic minority populations, and Oxford as a whole is 35% BAME. A quick word on language. The term BAME, as you probably know, stands for Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. It's not a term I particularly like. It is a label that gets used, and it is a kind of catch-all for broadly talking about people who aren't British, ethnically speaking, but does of course include Black British and Black Asian people and British Asian people. So it's a slightly confusing term and not a great label, and it also masks a huge amount of diversity. If you look down the list on the right of the screen, there's several different white communities. There's a huge array of mixed ethnicity communities, as well as individual nationalities such as Chinese, Indian, Bangladeshi, Pakistani. And we have a lot of these communities very strongly represented in Oxfordshire. So it's not a term I like, but it is one we will use periodically for reasons I just explained. But overall, I think what this slide is showing is that there is great ethnic diversity across the county, but we are predominantly a white British county. But it is that ethnic diversity I want to talk a bit more about now. So if I could have the next slide. The next slide is looking at where Oxfordshire Community Foundation's money has gone in the last year. And this data is taken from the primary beneficiary group as identified by grant applicants and recipients. And it is something we've done for many years, but it has been something that's been a topic of national debate, as you will have, some of you may have picked up on, with organisations like Charity So White lobbying the funding sector as a whole to be much more cognizant of ethnic minority communities, and in particular ethnic minority-led organisations. And primary beneficiary is a very blunt way of analysing where the money goes. So you can see here 7% of our money has gone to primary beneficiary groups for people of a minority ethnic, racial or national origin. But that does mask some BAME-led organisations who work with the broader population, and some white-led organisations that very specifically target ethnic minority communities. So, and the secondary beneficiary group is often, different, will be different to the first beneficiary group, and so that is again masking a lot of complexity. We also know that economic deprivation in particular is disproportionately impacts on some ethnic minority communities. And we do target areas of economic deprivation, and that correlates very highly with areas of high ethnic diversity. So we know that about 50% of our funding in the last year went to the 20% most ethnically diverse wards. And those wards correlate very highly with the most economically disadvantaged wards. And that is one example of intersectionality that we see where multiple issues impact on the same population groups. But broadly speaking, I think Oxfordshire Community Foundation have done a pretty good job of reaching the ethnically diverse communities across Oxfordshire. It's not been perfect, and we continue to be open to challenge and dialogue. And we're also aware that there are other minority groups who have a compelling case for investment. But we also know that there is a significant issue with regard to organisations led by people from those communities. They are typically under-resourced and lack capacity, and we're going to hear some examples of that as we go through the webinar. And one very striking example of that is that I think this has probably been the most challenging webinar to organise, because many of the organisations we've been trying to engage with and work with don't have the capacity and don't have the resources that a lot of the bigger, more established organisations do have. Which brings me on to the final, or the penultimate slide actually, looking at increasing representation. And I've said this to many people who I know are already on the call, that Oxfordshire Community Foundation, we aspire to represent all of the communities of Oxfordshire as well as we possibly can. Now, we will never do that perfectly, that's just not possible. But if you look at our website, we are predominantly, almost exclusively white in terms of our staff, in terms of our trustees. And that's something we are working to address and working to improve. And we aren't alone in the sector. We know when we look around meetings and so forth of local sector leaders that it is predominantly white faces, and I know trustees are predominantly white. Now, we don't have very good data to speak to this, so that is slightly anecdotal, but there was a study done in looking at London-based charities which showed that charities in terms of their senior leadership and trustees are less representative and less diverse than FTSE 100 companies, which I think is a pretty shocking statistic. So locally, we, Oxfordshire Community Foundation, and the wider sector are committed to action, and there are numerous local leaders who have been publishing allyship statements over the last few days and will be doing so in the coming few days. And we are also aiming to recruit a new chair and new trustees for the Community Foundation. And we have an array of skills and experiences and networks we're looking for amongst that. But one of the things that we're very clear about is we want to increase the diversity of our trustees, something that we've done recently with 2 younger trustees being appointed, but something we hope to build on for the future. And I think we're going to have a quick Zoom poll if this works. We haven't done this before, but we thought it'd be interesting just to try and get a top line snapshot of the diversity of the people attending this webinar. Now, we do look at the diversity of the speakers we invite to talk, but I think we're going to do a very rough poll on ethnic diversity of attendees today, and we hopefully get some instant feedback on how diverse we are as a group. Now, this worked 2 times out of 3 in rehearsal, so if it doesn't work now, my apologies.
Kate, are you clicking on poll at the bottom?
Yes, I can see it. Can everybody else see it?
No. Shall we go back to the slides, and if the poll pops up in the middle of the slides?
I can see it.
Adrian, I was asked when I first signed in.
Oh, right.
I was also asked as well, so
As was
I can't
I.
see it now.
Okay.
I was asked too.
Excellent.
I was.
Let's hope it was fair and equal as to who was asked, eh?
Yes, I was
It
asked.
looks like we can move on then if everybody's answered it already.
So hopefully we'll get some interesting data which we can have a look at later or share in the email afterwards. Can I go back to the slide? There's a quote I'd quite like to share. a few of you will have seen me share this before, but I think it's talking about race and racial equality and racial justice is challenging and very difficult. And I've probably been more nervous before this webinar than I have been before many others, because it is difficult to speak about. And I think this quote from Martin Luther King, I hope discomforts some of you, and I hope makes you think a little bit about who we are and our roles we have. And this is obviously aimed at the white contingent of the meeting largely, but I think the thing Martin Luther King is saying is that, you know, we all know of racists. We see them on the television, we see them in drama and so forth, and we know their attitudes are evil and abhorrent. And we like to think, therefore, that the problem of racism sits within those people. But actually, I think what Martin Luther King is saying is that it sits within people like me and many of you who have power, who have a relatively comfortable, secure existence, and obviously value and understandably value that security and that order. But we need to be prepared to sacrifice and challenge that security and order within ourselves, because it is coming at the expense of the order and security for many other communities and other populations. And I find that very uncomfortable and challenging, but I think actually this is a topic where we need to feel uncomfortable and challenged if we are actually going to bring about genuine change. That's my personal piece. So on to the subject matter for today. We're going to hear in a minute from Aseia Rafique, who's an equity, diversity and inclusion consultant who's been working with a number of organisations across Oxfordshire, and who's going to look at the national picture and also reflect on some of the conversations she's had locally. We're then talking to a number of people who are actively working locally to make a difference. We have Yasmin from the Banbury Mosque, who's been doing fantastic work up in the north of the county. Cathy King, who's trustee at Cowley Road Works, who are the people who run Cowley Road Carnival. And as a former member of staff of East Oxford Action, I'm delighted that the phoenix burns so brightly from the flames of East Oxford Action when that ended many years ago. We're also going to be talking to Jacqui Gitau, who's actually not with us yet, but is hoping to join us about 5:30 or soon after. So we'll probably talk to her after we talk to Sara Fernandez. But Jacqui's Chief Executive of African Families in the UK, and also has been leading a lot of work with a BAME infrastructure group that she will talk about a bit more. Sara Fernandez, CEO of Oxford Hub, also recently joined OCF as a trustee, is going to talk about a new EDI framework that is being launched for Oxfordshire. And then we will have time for Q&A at the end, and I can see there's already been a huge number of comments. I haven't looked at them yet, but I'm sure there will be a lively conversation at the end for as much as time allows. So without further ado, I will hand over to Aseia.
Okay, so I think I've just come off mute, so that's really good. So thank you very much, and really great to be here today. So my name's Aseia, and I work with my colleague Venetia, and we're consultants around equality, diversity, inclusion. And our work with yourselves and with Oxfordshire All In has been all about equality, diversity, inclusion. And I think one of the things that I kind of wanted to start with here is why it's really important and why we're focusing in on equality, diversity and inclusion. And I think each of those three terms, they mean something different, but as a whole, what we are aiming towards as organisations is to become inclusive workplace cultures. So that's in terms of being inclusive within our workplace, so within the people that we work with, our staff, our colleagues, but also the people that we work for in the communities, those people that we engage with, our stakeholders. And I think it's really important that we consider, in terms of equality, diversity, inclusion, EDI, that we look at that as not as mainstream, so not as an add-on. And I know in terms of the Equality Act, which in terms of it coming along in 2010, it has been a while, it's been a decade, just over a decade, and things have moved on since then. So we talk about the protected characteristics outlined in the Equality Act, but in terms of the work that we're doing and you're doing in EDI, I think we're looking wider. So we're looking at age, we're looking at race, we're looking at gender, disability, but also other areas of disadvantage, such as like social mobility, caring responsibilities, looking in at individual experiences. And I know that this is a protected characteristic, but for example, pregnancy and maternity. So sometimes we don't discuss these aspects, and we don't think about how we can encourage a wide variety of people from marginalized or underrepresented backgrounds to engage with us, and the ways that we can do that. And I think one of the things is around collaboration, working with each other, sharing resources, talking to each other, sharing training, information, and especially I think that comes into being when smaller and larger organizations can work together and can share those resources. And I think it's imperative that we don't lose sight of making sure that we do think about EDI, because it's easy to think, actually, you know, none of us are biased. We work hard, we make sure that we're inclusive, we're kind, we're respectful. But sometimes if we don't think about it consciously, we actually might miss the things that we need to do. And some of those things are quite easy to put into practice. So as we had, I think you spoke earlier, we need leaders, you know, leaders who can take this forward, who can initiate that actually, you know, this is something that our organisation and Oxfordshire feel strongly about. And we need to have those role models so people can see that, you know, in terms of that change, people are talking about that change and wanting to make that change happen. And I think diversity within our workplaces, it is important, but it is not the be end and end all of it. So I know Oxfordshire, in terms of the demographic, it is majority white, and in terms of boards and trustees. But in terms of what we do in EDI is making sure that we are equipped to support all communities across Oxfordshire, to make sure that they are included, they do have access to resources, they have access to opportunities, to choices, to get involved where they want to get involved, and also making sure that we are asking them what their needs are too. And I think that's really key in terms of the work that we do, because sometimes it's really easy to think, actually, you know, I know what that person needs or what that community might need, but that community knows best. They know what they need. And if we can accommodate or work together to make sure that that is supported, and I think that is key to kind of the work that we do. So I think one of the things that is really kind of exciting about the work that we've been doing with Oxfordshire All In and the community groups is that this is something that we're trying to set the scene, EDI, for the volunteering community sector across Oxfordshire. And that's not something that I've seen or I've come across anywhere else. So I've seen standards for local authority and for government, but not set standards for community and voluntary organisations. And I think this is a collaborative approach, where organisations, where yourselves can support each other. And I think that value will you'll see that when you engage with others. So it's not just, for example, if you have like a project or initiative and you're wondering, actually, how can I engage the older community to get involved in this particular project? Well, have a chat with the other organisations. What are other organisations doing? What can you do? Have a read on some of the information and guidance that we've put together, and see some of the things that you might be able to kind of look at engaging on. But I think the most important thing is to speak with your colleagues, is to speak with the organisations that you work with, and also to speak in terms of with the community as well. So the work that we put together, we've named this it's called an equality framework, so for organisations across Oxfordshire. So the name might change slightly, I'm not sure, but in terms of that equality framework, that sets kind of not just the standards, but the expectations on EDI of what organisations can aspire towards and what they can achieve. And it's not a panacea. It's not if I do all 5 things correctly, then I will hit that gold standard. It's a moving progress. It's taking things into consideration and taking time to be able to do the things that you need to do. Small organisations, larger organisations, they're different where they are in terms of their background and their history on EDI, but that doesn't mean that they can't share that information. And it doesn't mean that where anybody is starting, that they're starting from either the beginning or the middle or the end. It actually doesn't matter. It's a journey. And I think that's what this journey is. And it's in terms of EDI, things do move on and they do change and conversations change. And this hopefully will be able to do that with you. And I think that's really important. And I think it's really great that we are all here today talking about diversity, talking about equality, equity, and encouraging us all to kind of have this chat. And I think it's to make sure that that happens is to put in place those key things around being able to share those resources, being able to collaborate with each other, and having that kind of open network, that conversation that groups can have with each other. And I think something like this webinar that you're saying that you have once every month, I think that's a great starting point. And I think that's a step where we need to move forwards and also make sure that we do mention EDI in our conversations, in our team meetings, in our work, looking at our data, looking at our statistics, having a look at evaluating what that looks like and seeing where potentially those changes that we can make to improve or to better the work that we do with the communities and with the other organisations that you work with.
Thank you, Aseia.
No worries, thank you.
Really constructive and really interesting feedback to hear, and thank you for your thoughts. I appreciate the sense of it being a journey and not an end point I think is really important. And I also think the emphasis on lived experience. I've worked a lot in mental health and done a lot of work trying to get people with serious and enduring mental health conditions to speak in their own right and on their own behalf. And I think it's a really important thing, and something we try to do through these webinars and we'll continue to try to do in the future. So
yeah,
thank you so much.
I think we shouldn't get stuck on things that we don't know or we're not sure about. I think that's where the conversation happens. So you talked earlier about the acronym BAME. If we're not sure about is that the right terminology to use, can we use something different? Now is the time to kind of come together and see if there is some terminology, and it might not be the government's guidance because everybody has different ideas or perceptions, to identify what that might look like. I mean, it could be global majorities, for example, but I think we shouldn't get stuck that we don't know what we need to do, because there's people here, people in the room that do know or might have an idea, and it's those conversations that we need to have with each other and not to be afraid. Sometimes I think when we talk about, especially around race in particular, people can be worried that, are we going to put our foot in it? Are we going to say the wrong thing? But a safe space is where you're able to articulate, actually, I'm not really sure about this. What do you think I could do? And having a look at some of that information and, talking to colleagues about that. And I think, sometimes people do get stuck on that, but the way to kind of progress and to make that change isn't just a tick box. And I've seen loads of organizations saying, actually putting in lots and lots of money into initiatives, into programs, but the change isn't happening. So I think the change is happening with you, hopefully engaging with one another to make that happen.
Thank you. And I hope you're able to stick around for the rest of the session. There will probably be Q&A at the end. But thank you, Aseia.
No.
Just for those of you who haven't seen it, the results of the poll are in. The headline is that 90% of people have filled in the form, and attendance today is 82% white, 7% mixed or multiple ethnic groups, 5% Asian or Asian British, 3% Black, British, Caribbean or African, and 2% other ethnic groups. So we've got a reasonably good mix today, which is good to see, but not the most scientific analysis, I will acknowledge. So next I'd like to move on and ask Yasmin to unmute yourself. I'm sure many people know you, but for those who don't, Yasmin, do you just want to start by saying who you are and what you do?
Hi there, my name is Yasmin. I represent Banbury Mosque. I'm the coordinator at Banbury Mosque, volunteer coordinator at Banbury Mosque.
Yes, a volunteer. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And can you tell us about some of the initiatives and some of the great work that Banbury Mosque have been doing over the last year through the pandemic?
So prior to COVID, we was just small. We had a small community fridge. We had landfill that we had from 13 different areas from Banbury that food came from, and 32 deliveries a week, and we just filled our fridge up like a normal every day, and it was landfill, so anybody come and use the fridge and take the food. As of COVID, when COVID came, it was all sort of all so sudden. It happened overnight. We didn't even have an email address, so we had to set up with an email address. That was the first thing, because we thought, we've got all this food, but the people can't get to us. How do they get to us? So we set up an email address. We sort of set up a social media account, people to access this, to send us messages, to send food out. Initially, we were just sending food out to the vulnerable, so it was just the over 65s, and then we gathered very quickly that this was sort of like, there was more than the over 65 that needed help. So we went to the single families, people that were on furlough, and it just had continued from there. So even our comms wasn't even in place. Volunteers just emailed, like the people that wanted food emailed if they could help, and we had within 3-4 days we had 48 volunteers that volunteered. And our drivers were taxi drivers that were on furlough, that didn't have work, and they said they would do the deliveries. So sort of everybody just smucked in, and it was just me single-handedly taking all this information in from volunteers wanting to help, taxi drivers that wanted to come on board, from setting up an email address, from working with organisations. We had companies like Bidvest that contacted us that they had surplus food that they wanted to take off, and it wasn't just small amounts, it was pallets, 13-14 pallets of cheese, pizza dough, so everything that Nando's and Pizza Hut couldn't have, all that delivery was just coming to us. We realised quite quickly that we had so much, we became a distribution centre, so we started distributing to Salvation Army, Bicester Community Fridge, other local organisations that sort of wanted to take the food off us. So not only were we giving to the general public, we also being a distributor in the evenings, so it just went from strength to strength from there. We delivered in excess of 2,500 parcels over COVID, and that was to anybody that wanted a parcel. That was in first lockdown, and we continued doing this right the way throughout till the last lockdown. We did this 7 days a week, and every day there was deliveries that went out. Yeah, we worked quite closely with Oxford Mutual Aid, and they supported us a little bit throughout this. We've had no training of this. We just sort of did what we knew, and we just did what we could, and made sure that nobody went hungry, and that was our main purpose. And we successfully completed that goal, and we were very happy that we could, you know, offer this to the locals in Banbury.
Moved on from food distribution now into education and other areas, haven't
absolutely, yeah. So lockdown 2 came, and we realised that we wanted to do the same, but a lot of people had taken the initiative and started doing this. So we thought, well, okay, that's fine. We're there on the back burner if anybody wants any support. But we moved quite quickly from our food bank and our hygiene bank that we opened over COVID, and our food container that was all opened over lockdown 1. So lockdown 2, we knew that our community needed support in training. So we went from training. We did first aid training for our community. We did health and safety training. We did food hygiene training. We did mental health training. Bearing in mind that our community hadn't used Zoom before, so we had to explain what Zoom was, log them onto Zoom. We had social distancing classes in between the mosque area, so they could come to the mosque. So now I've got like 19 ladies that I've trained up, can use Zoom and can actually access Zoom from their phone. Prior to that, they couldn't even do that. So we've sort of done the training. We did GCSE classes for the children offline. So we did all that on the second lockdown, and then quite quickly moving on from second lockdown to the third lockdown, I realised that in second lockdown we wanted to provide exercise classes, and the ladies, we started the class from swimming, yoga, classes like that, but I think we had 3 weeks when we went back down to second lockdown. This was over Christmas, and I just did my prayers one night, and I said, well, not one night, I was praying that, you know, if only we had a gym that we could sort of have this and so on. And God listened to my prayers, and out of the blue, we managed to sort of locate a gym that is in the area near the mosque, which is in the Grimsbury area, which is a deprived area. We've got a local gym that's now in the hands of one of the community members, and we've sort of working with them quite closely, and they'll be supporting our communities to help them with the gym. And I've progressed myself, and I've done a PT course. I'm also become an instructor, which means we won't have to worry about getting an instructor. So I've sort of done quite a lot, from distributing food to becoming an instructor to helping support the community with Zoom links and stuff. It's been a challenging time. It's been a really, really steep learning curve for myself. I haven't been to university, so I was sort of like, it's all very new to me. So technology was very new to me. But I kept, you know, sailing and thinking, no, I can't sink. I've got to keep going, because if I let go of this rope, then everybody else will sink with me. So we've had to continue. It's been very difficult, obviously, being a volunteer to do all this. And as you said earlier, we are the people that's sort of forgotten about, because we didn't even have an email address. We didn't even know what an email address was. We didn't know where to start from. We started looking to setting up a charity now. and our volunteers have gone down a little bit because they've all gone back to work and so on. But yeah, our work is continuing, and it's sort of we've flourished. We've really sort of flourished out of lockdown, and yeah, I don't know what else.
And I mean, you talked about the fact that you're a volunteer, and that's obviously reflective of a lack of core capacity for what's become a really incredibly active local group. And I mean, just like you think a little bit about, you know, what the challenges are for you as an organisation as you try and kind of become more sustainable in the future.
Well, core funding to have a coordinator that can do this or continue to do this and be there. So in between my paid work, which is 3 days, I sort of run around and do work for the volunteering, but it's in excess of about 60 hours a week that I do. And if there's an application form for funding that I've got to fill in, that's like 7 hours. I mean, I remember filling an application in for OCF. For the 2 applications, I spent 7 hours on one and 3.5 hours on another. That's 10 hours of volunteering, filling 2 application forms in. It's a big amount of time, and I haven't got any volunteers along with me that I can say, can you do this? There isn't anybody there that's trained up. I've just done the bid writing training myself, and I'm very conscious that I've got to start, training more volunteers. But there should be core funding that should be there, because this will be lost, this will be gone. If I was to have a burnout now and say that's it, I can't do anymore, everything would just stop still, and it would stand still, and the work that we've created will just be forgotten about.
Thank you. I mean, I thank you for everything you've done, and thank you for sharing it so eloquently today. I think it's a really compelling picture of what a local community can do and how quickly it can respond, but actually how important it is to think about core capacity in the
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you, Yasmin. I'm going to have to move us on. We are slightly behind time, but I'm seeing there's some comments and questions popping up, so we may well come back to you later.
Thank you.
Cathy from Cowley Road Works, do you want to unmute yourself? And
yes, sorry if it sounds like I'm underwater as well.
That's all right, you're clear enough to hear, I hope, for everybody. So do you want to introduce yourself and who you represent today?
Yes, so I'm Cathy, and I'm a trustee at Cowley Road Works, which is a charity based in East Oxford. And it really is about using arts to bring people together and get them to recognise the diversity of the city. And there's 2 main ways that we do this. Firstly is, I'm sure, or I hope you've all heard of and maybe participated in the Cowley Road Carnival, which is an annual carnival which normally in normal times would take over Cowley Road, a real melting pot of 50,000 people from different cultures. And this year it will be moving online, and we use Carnival really as a springboard for a wider set of inclusive arts programs, which is learning through Carnival and building up skills for young artists, and particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. And we work quite a lot with disabled young people as well, and really using Carnival as an anchor. So it's it's not just the one-day party, even though it's really important to have a community-led event, particularly coming out of COVID as well. I feel having that community-driven event, but it also is used as a basis for a wider outreach program as well.
Thank you. And I know, I mean, I've posted a blog about allyship and what we as white people can do to try and increase diversity, and I think you're probably ploughing a similar path, but it'd be interesting to know what Cowley Road Works has been doing to achieve greater representation on its board in particular.
Yes, so I thought just to give you a bit of context about our board, because it's something worth celebrating, I feel, is that the whole of the board is embedded into the Oxford community. We have a 50% representation from the global majority on the board, which goes against the grain, the typical board that you might think of, and roughly 60% female, 40% male. And I think we have a real age diversity on the board as well. And I think in terms of building greater diversity, there's two connecting but important paths. And one is developing the pipeline to the board to get people to the table. And the other is ways of keeping people at the table once you have them. And I think Cowley Road Works is very committed to rooting and discovering talent from within the community that represent the community and not necessarily expecting people to come to the trustee board with the skills to be, or with the understanding exactly what a trustee is, but to get people with the right experience, the right competencies, the right engagement, and then invest in training to allow them to fulfill their duties as a trustee. So, using myself as an example, I came to the trustee board through the Oxford Hub's Young Trustee programme, where Cowley Roadworks invested to take on a young trustee and then supported the trustee in terms of developing skills. And then the second side, which is sustaining a board of trustees, I think it's really important to invest time together as a board to creating a safe space for trustees. And I think that can be done in a number of ways. I think firstly, really simple ways is just making sure that you allow time at meetings for people to come in and get settled, to be able to share news at the end. But then there's the more skills building. So we're committed to a rolling programme of training for our board of trustees, where every session we'll spend 10 minutes together as a board looking at one element of the trustee framework and thinking together about how we can fulfill our duties, so that everyone knows that they're supported to have an equal voice on the board. And then also thinking in terms of safety, Cowley Roadworks and a number of other cultural organisations have recently signed up to the Oxford Cultural Organisations Anti-Racism Manifesto, which is going to be a really dynamic document where charities can commit to working together to look at their practices. It's exciting because it uses really dynamic language. It will create an action plan that the board will develop and grow together and implement. And then we'll make sure that this is embedded, going back to the, developing the pipeline, and we'll make sure that this is embedded and that new recruits and new trustees sign up to the manifesto from day one to commit to putting their name on paper to fulfill this action plan as well.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think that's already been posted in the chat box, possibly more than once. But that was part of the inspiration for the blogs that a number of us have been doing here, was seeing other people in a similar sector locally standing up and making a public statement. And I think it's a really important step for us all to be taken. Thank you, Cathy. Please do stick around. I'm going to move us on. I think Jacqui Gitau is with us.
Yes.
So Jacqui, do you want to unmute yourself?
I'm here joining from the car.
Hey, wonderful, Jacqui. It's good to see you. Do you want to just introduce yourself for those of us who don't know you?
Okay, thank you. My name is Jacqui Gitau, and I'm a co-founding director of African Families in the UK. Just what it says on the tin, that's what it is. But we've been existing for the last 5+ years. But now we are working with wider than just African families. So when we started, we were targeting African families, and the main aim for our organization was bridging the gap, being the in-between for families that have come to settle into the UK and accessing services within health, within education, within social care, and just translating those services, not just the language, but even helping the families to understand what it means and accessing it. So we do training, we do cross-cultural parenting training. We do training to help families and individuals to understand the different social systems, the different law that they need to understand, and just to make things good for themselves and their children. So that's what AFI UK exists to do. We have moved on, and now we're working with wider migrant families, because the migration issue is not just for Africans. And now we are reaching out to other families that need that support. So now within our groups, within our organizations, we work with Syrian families, we have Iraqis, we have people from not just the African continent, even the Caribbean continent, and just working together because that's become the main issue. So actually this afternoon, when I didn't think I could make it, thankfully we have a little bigger team. I asked my colleague Diane if she could step in just in case I didn't make it. And So there's that.
It's another example of how limited the resources are for a lot of organisations led by minority ethnic communities. Could you talk us a bit more about some of the challenges for organisations led by ethnic minorities?
Yeah. Actually, I think just looking at what we've had to do now, this juggling in, most of us have risen out of fulfilling a need that we saw within our community. That was a gap that it was not necessarily evident to anybody else, maybe just to ourselves, and we saw how to fill it in. And we're doing this on the side. So I do this, I work 4 days for Oxfordshire County Council, and then Saturday and Friday and other evenings I work for Rafique UK. So this is my lunch break. I've just finished something, I'm doing this in my lunch break. And then you'll find that's the case for most of us. So we have our meetings in the evenings, we have our meetings at the weekends when we catch up and do this, what we now realize is really essential work, but we're still doing it in our extra time, as it were. Yeah. And then I hesitate to say this, but you've taken on additional responsibility with the BAME infrastructure group locally. So could you tell us about what's happening there? Yeah, again, just out of a need. So during COVID, the very first lockdown, when all of you working in this sector just realized how suddenly it was very difficult and very different for everybody. Within, again, our own communities, our own groups, there was the extra need. So now all the statistics you know about and you read about, who are the frontline workers, who are the ones most likely to be affected by poverty, by illness, who are the ones when it's homeschooling, maybe the parents don't speak the language or they don't understand the system. Suddenly, that was us. And so all the organizations that were doing this, again, are still the ones having to deal with the life situation of that thing. And then there was funding to help charities, help organizations to meet this need. And the National Emergency Trust was wanting to give this funding to BAME-led organizations. And they looked in Oxfordshire. Sadly, I'm an Oxfordshire citizen myself. I say, we didn't have an infrastructure organization that was BAME-led. Rafique UK have been here for 5 years. We are working with group leaders of these small organizations, but we didn't set ourselves up to be an infrastructure organization. We just actually fell into it doing it. So with Adrian and with other organizations, again, we had the conversation and we said, we'll do it. Because actually we were the ones who were in the position, but not very equipped. We didn't even have the capacity, but there were other people willing to come and sit around the table with us. And we said, we are going to create an infrastructure organization. So we are in the process of doing that with other leaders from other really small groups and just individuals, but we are mapping out now, talking to members of our community, talking to other group leaders, how we go about it so that we can actually set it up. And we are determined to do that. Wonderful, and I really hope we can support you or continue to support you to do that, Jacqui. Thank you for sharing the time, and thank you for using your lunch break to talk to us. It's really appreciated. Yeah. I'm gonna have to move us on now. Our final speaker, Sara Fernandez. Sara, do you want to unmute yourself? Do you want to introduce yourself for the people who don't know who you are, and then?
Brilliant. I am here, many of you know me as the CEO of Oxford Hub, working across the city to create more meaningful relationships across people who wouldn't otherwise have met. But I am here today representing Oxfordshire All In, which is a collective of organizations that came together during the pandemic to offer better support to communities and to make sure that particularly very grassroots groups, many of whom had just set up for pandemic and emergency support, had the resources that they needed to really serve their communities. And they did so very effectively because they were very, very close to the issues. They were very close to their communities, but often they didn't have the same infrastructure. So fast forward 14 months since the beginning of the pandemic, and at Oxfordshire, we've been doing lots of work thinking, well, what would it take to really sustain some of that community spirit and make sure that we can support community groups to sustain that effort over time. And something that we think is really important as part of that work is that there is a clear sector-wide commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that's why we've been working with Aseia and Venetia to put together that equality framework that Aseia was talking about earlier. So what is that equality framework? I'm going to give you all a quick sneak peek. I'll share screen. And you can probably see it. It looks like this, very bright. It is very long, and I won't go through it right now, but you will get it with the follow-up email to this webinar. And we will be putting it all across social media early tomorrow so that you can take your time and read it. Now, what is it and what isn't? What it is that we recognize as part of Oxfordshire that often when we all work in equity, diversity and inclusion, it can be quite challenging and we're all like unsure, and we need to maybe like spend money on consultants or find ways to do things. And sometimes, particularly for smaller community groups, those resources aren't in place. So bigger charities do have the resources, but then they end up doing things which are very internally facing. So this framework is an opportunity to have something that is for the sector as a whole, that has been co-created with 40+ organizations, trustees, staff and volunteers have been involved. And the big objective is to enable us to make more progress in equality and to do that faster. So the framework is 20 pages long and it has a lot of content, and I recommend you like get a good cup of tea and go through it in your own time. But we know that lots of text is not necessarily accessible for everyone. So in June, we will be sharing a companion to the framework, which will be a website with lots of resources, case studies and practical tools that you will be able to use to make progress within your organization. And part of this is about encouraging loads of peer support so that, you know, for example, at Oxford Hub, we've been doing lots of blind recruitment. If your organization is interested in doing blind recruitment, then you know that the resources are online in this resource hub, but also you can keep in touch. And we know that lots of individual organizations are doing lots of really amazing work. So we want to encourage everyone to share that so that we can all make that progress. So the pack will be shared, the website will come in June. Just want to emphasize, it is version 1. We know, because we have tested it with some colleagues across the sector, that there are things that we want to improve and add, and there's lots more that could be included. So it is very much a live document, and the companion website will enable us to share more and more all the time. So I hope that you're as excited as I am about this, and I look forward to sharing it with everyone tomorrow.
Thank you, Sara. And if they weren't when you started speaking, I'm sure they are by now. So thank you for that whistle-stop tour of the framework. Now, I gather there's not a huge number of questions or comments coming up in the chat, but do post them. Oh, sorry, I clicked on something there I shouldn't have done. So, and if you want to know more about the EDI framework or any other aspects, then please do get in touch with me or Sara or one of the other people involved. There is, I know tomorrow, because I'm attending it, a how to be an inclusive employer workshop. Grant Hayward, I think, is here somewhere, and if he hasn't posted the link already, I'm sure we can share that. Kate, have we got any comments or questions we need to pick up?
Yes, it's interesting you said that, actually, because one of the comments was from John Tabor about, from an employer's perspective, what should employers be doing in terms of training and development for their staff?
So who would like to answer that? I mean, beyond attending the workshop tomorrow, which I think Sara's just posted the link in the chat box.
So tomorrow's workshop is particularly focused on recruitment, which is one of the 6 different areas of the framework, and it's only like an aspect of it. And we know that it is also about retention and progression once you have more diverse members of staff. But in terms of learning and development, which is another area of the workshop, Aseia, I don't know if I can maybe suggest that you just share some ideas, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. So like in terms of learning and development, it's I think what it is important to do is not just concentrate on one aspect of that. So for example, there's been a lot of talk around delivering unconscious bias training and whether that's good or whether that's bad and whether we should be doing it, and governments are saying actually, you know, that might not be the way that it should work. But it's only one part of that. It gives you a small understanding of how bias, for example, might manifest in your systems and your processes and in individuals as well. So in terms of learning and development, again, it's an ongoing process, and it's about understanding aspects of the work that you do and how that can relate to EDI. And it could be things that you could have in terms of like discussions or workshops. You could have formal training, or you could have e-learning. And I think sometimes one of the things that I found most helpful in different organizations is where people have been able to come along to a discussion and to actually talk about some of the issues that they worried about, kind of, I'm not really sure about that. What do you mean about that? And I think sometimes, especially in some of the more contentious topic areas, I should say, around trans or around disability, for example, race, people can then say, well, you know, is this what do you think about this particular point of view? Safe environment, have a discussion and understand where people are coming from. So an example, there was an organization that did some training, and they asked the Black members of staff to share their experiences following Black Lives Matter around some of the microaggressions or racism that they had experienced. And some of the white members of staff said, well, actually, we don't feel that we should join in or participate because we want our colleagues' voices to be heard. But this is the time to have everybody's voices to be heard, to share all kinds of experiences, to understand what the point of view is from where somebody hasn't had that experience and where somebody has had that experience. And if somebody has had that experience, we also need to take into consideration in terms of when they're relaying their experience, in terms of their kind of historical, they feel awkward about it, have they, you know, are they reliving like a trauma? So it's just trying to understand some of those things, and especially around terms and terminology. So many things: intersectionality, microaggressions, white privilege, intersectionality. So I think sometimes in terms of that learning and development, it's not a one-stop shop. It's a continuous process, and lots of different things support that. And so, again, reading, I think one of the most kind of links that I provided to a piece of training was a little video, BBC bite-sized video explaining what white privilege is. And I had so many people saying, actually, do you know what, that 2-minute video, that was so helpful for me to understand, because I didn't really get it. You know, I thought, well, I don't have privilege and I'm working really hard and it's really difficult for me to understand. So sometimes it's just coming across those resources is really helpful in understanding the wider context of EDI. So not just one element, but all of those elements.
Thank you, Aseia. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that kind of curiosity and open-mindedness, and that to create that safe space so people can have conversations, which will at times inevitably be challenging and difficult. But I think we need, if we do so with with mutual respect and with open-mindedness, then I think we can all learn together. Okay, well, I think we're going to have to draw it to a close there because we are coming towards time. I am always keen to talk to people. If you want to be critical, if you want to be complimentary, the Calendly link to book a half-hour slot in my diary should be going up in the chat box. And I've had many very, very interesting conversations with local leaders and local representatives, and I hope to continue doing the same. And in the spirit of what Aseia just said, I will listen with open-minded curiosity to what you have to say, and look forward to continuing those conversations. Thank you very much to all our speakers, and thank you very much to everyone for attending today and participating in this webinar. Thank you, Aseia. Thank you, Yasmin. Thank you, Cathy, Jacqui and Sara. We will be back, of course, on the 26th of May at the same time, looking at solving homelessness in Oxfordshire. You may think that's unachievable. I'm sure there will be people along to tell you that actually it should be very achievable. So please do come back and join us in a month.